came to England in 1973 because he came here to study some accountancy. So that's a little bit of background about my parents. Essentially, I was brought up in an area called Hackney in London, and Hackney was voted and also studied as the worst area in the world. At many times it became just under one of the worst areas in America, New York, and many times it became top. It used to be called the ghetto of Europe, which means very poor people, a lot of violence, criminality, delinquency, huge problems. So I was brought up in that kind of environment. But I had a very weird dad. My dad, he came from an Orthodox Greek background, but he changed his ideas and he developed this new form of spiritualism. You know, God's inside you, you can achieve anything you want. Like my dad used to say to me when I was 7 years old, Andrea, that was my name, Andrea, Boris Nakanes, which in Greek means you can achieve anything in your life. Or Theos in a mesaso, God's inside you. So I was brought up with these kind of ideas that I was the main driver of my destiny. I can achieve anything, I could be super confident. You know, I literally took myself to be a small god. And this was the kind of new age spiritualism that my dad was preaching. Although he was very loving, very compassionate, and he had other very good traits, but some of his new age theology was quite weird, quite not in line with Islamic thinking, obviously. So I was brought up in that kind of environment, and my dad told me to read many books and to understand various things. Like he had a huge library with various books from the Hindu tradition, the Buddhist tradition, the Sikh tradition, the Christian tradition, every tradition, apart from the Islamic tradition. Because he used to say to me, Andrea, you could become anything you want in your life. Do anything, be anything, but don't become a Muslim. And then he ended, I'd rather you become gay than Muslim. It's not funny, he used to say that to me all the time, because he had these very Greek kind of attitudes and ideas about Islam. You know, if you're a Muslim, you have to be a Turk. Yeah? Because in Greece, they think anything Islamic, you become a Turk all of a sudden. I remember when I was arguing with my dad, which you shouldn't argue with your dad, but in the beginning, you have a lot of zeal and passion, so you do so. And my dad would say, so did you change your name then? I said, yes, my name is Hamzah. He said, what? That's what they call rats in Greek. Yeah, so from then on, my mum would say, can you take that rat off your face, please? Because she doesn't like the beard and stuff. Anyways, I was brought up in that kind of environment, and I think it was the most correct seed to plant in my soul to look and inquire and investigate about different things, different philosophies and ideas. I was very interested in philosophy, different religions and ways of life. So, as a result, I went to college to study the sciences, physics, chemistry, maths, physics, chemistry, biology, and Greek. And while I was studying, I was meeting many Muslims, and I was inquiring into the ideas, and I was like, wow, this is a very interesting way of life. I actually used to like women in hijab in terms of, I thought it was very humble, beautiful practice. I used to like people praying. Some of these things I really liked. The cultural aspects of Islam were very in line with my innate nature. I thought they were good things. So I wanted to investigate in various different traditions and cultures. So on one hand, I'll be going to a Buddhist temple and just inquiring about Buddhism, which to me is not really a religion, it's more of an agnostic philosophy. I was inquiring into things like that, and at the same time I was speaking to my Muslim friends about Islam, reading books here and there. But because I was a little bit of a show-off, and I wanted to learn about things just to show off things usually, and because there were a lot of Muslims at college, I used to learn a lot about Islam. I used to say things like, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when I was non-Muslim. I say, you know, your Prophet, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. I used to say all of these things, yeah? You know, you can't do this, you shouldn't be mixing with women, you need to put your hijab on, you need to do this. Like, wow, who is this guy? This guy's weird. He's not Muslim, but he's preaching Islam to us. So it was that kind of interesting atmosphere. Then eventually, I was still continuing that kind of trend of looking into Buddhism and looking into Tibetan Buddhism specifically. I was very interested in the Tibetan culture. And then I was still looking into Islam, but in a very cultural perspective, not for it to be truth, for it to be, let me find about this way of life. Then I started reading about different philosophies, Aristotle, Plato. It's my tradition. It comes from the Greeks. So I thought, what do the Greeks have to say about this mess that we live in, called the world, Then I went to university to study psychology. I think this was the time that really it hit home. It was a tough time. Because as I said, I was brought up in a very weird, new age family, very compassionate. Wallahi Azim, my dad to this day always says to me he loves me, every day. You don't even find this amongst Muslims, which is problematic. We need to rediscover our tradition of rahmah. According to hadith in Sahih Muslim, that if you don't show mercy to others, Allah will not show mercy to you. So, my dad brought me up in a very stable family, emotionally and intellectually, very emotionally stable. He'll be my best friend if you like. May Allah guide him. And because I was brought up in that kind of environment, it was a bit of a bubble. I was in my own bubble. Everyone's really nice. No one has a problem. Everyone's beautiful. So when I went to university, it was new realities. Everyone became very individualistic. Typically, when you live in liberal societies, liberalism, for example, as a way of life, it became very problematic for people because it starts to propagate this idea of individualism, egoism, nafsi nafsi. As the Americans say, with him. What's in it for me? I'm alright, Jack. That kind of mentality. As long as I'm fine, forget him. That kind of perspective. And this really resonates in the hearts of people, in the minds of people, in the souls of people. And this wasn't attractive to me because I was brought up in a very weird type of new age, happy-go-lucky, hippie family. For example, my family is vegetarian. Have you ever seen a Greek vegetarian before? There's not even a word for vegetarianism in the Greek language. It's actually chortophalos, which basically means the one who eats vegetables. So that's the kind of reality I was being brought up in. So when I went to university, I started meeting different people or different cultures, traditions, races, theologies, ideologies. But there was one common theme, especially from a Western perspective, this individualistic drive. This core political value that they push forward. And it wasn't attractive to me. I actually hated it. Because I didn't want to see myself as a divorced entity without any social obligations or attachments. Thinking that I'm sovereign. Hamzah's sovereign. I didn't appreciate that. Because even when I wasn't Muslim, before I was Muslim, I used to say, God knows Hamzah better than Hamzah does. Do you see? So I used to think, no, I'm not sovereign. There are social attachments. And what's interesting from a psychological, developmental psychological perspective is that developmental psychologists are moving away from the individualist constructor, which basically means the child develops his cognitive abilities by learning on his own. They've moved away from that Piaget theory. Now they're going towards social practices and norms because they understand that the individual learns with society. There's a famous African saying. I'm not going to say it in African because my African's quite bad. I'm only kidding, I don't even know African. But it takes a village to bring up a child. So this kind of individualism that people used to stab people in the back, they used to copy my notes, they used to copy my work. I got chucked out of the first year because I got blamed for copying, but they were copying my work. It was a disaster. I got back in and I tried to finish psychology, but I was still upset about the whole scenario of things. So I took a year out and I went to work for the government, the police IT organization in Britain, to basically gain some project management practice and training. However, I still then wanted to realize about what life was about. I didn't like this individualistic culture. I came from a very unique background to inquire about different realities. As I said, I was learning about Buddhism and about Islam. So I went further to the philosophical tradition. And then I became convinced that God exists. And I became convinced that the Quran was from God. But I wasn't a Muslim. Wallahi, I could probably prove God to Muslims better than Muslims could prove it to themselves. I could prove the Quran to Muslims better than the Muslims could prove it to me. This is how I was. Knowledge for me was very abstract. It was outside of my heart. It was academic almost. I call it intellectual gymnastics. It was just there. I could prove God. When I was reading Quran, even in the English language, what does the Quran say? It makes you think. The Quran seeks to impose itself on everybody. I'm not ashamed to say this. The Quran wants to impose itself on you. But this imposition is positive because it wants to engage with your aqliyah and engage with your nafsiyah. It wants to tease you, tease your mind and your soul to understand that there is one Allah. For example, how does one do this? But from the psychological perspective, a psychologist would ask you questions. How are you, brother? So what's your perspective about these things?